right, well, it is just a little bit after the top of the hour. I know there's still several people coming in, but I think we'll get rolling. Thank you so much for everybody being here today. And as I think we're all aware, the industry is a little crazy at the moment, to say the least. And there's just so much happening in so many different places. So I would love it if anybody has comments or questions that you want to throw it in the chat, comments that you want to make about what I'm talking about, or questions you have on anything else. Feel free to do that, because it's kind of hard to keep up with everything at the moment. It's a little nutty, but let me jump in. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the managing partner of the WAV Group. We're a consulting firm that's been around for almost 25 years in the industry, and have a lot of passion and focus on associations, MLSs, brokers, technology companies. I actually run RE Technology, and I'm also the chairman-elect of a group that I'm excited about telling you about, called the National Small Business Association. And that is a group that's designed to help really pretty much all of us in real estate that are small businesses, not so much advocate specifically for what we do in real estate, but to advocate for making a more business-friendly environment, especially for small businesses. So that's a nonpartisan group, and I'm the chairman-elect there. So there's a lot of interesting things I'm seeing through that, not only about small businesses, but just in general, the tenor of Washington, which is, as we're not surprised, not a very friendly for real estate at the moment. So let me jump in and we'll just start talking from here. So the first thing I thought, it's always helpful to just start with, like, what's going on out there beyond the walls of our industry, and how is it affecting what's happening? So just some quick numbers to remind us that these, I always like to look at charts that are a little bit longer term to give us a little bit of perspective, right? So as we know, the number of inventory has gone way down, and it's really kind of pretty much at one of its lowest levels ever. That's making, those of you that are either practitioners or that are working with practitioners, I think it's making everybody a little nervous. Some people a little cranky because they just don't have enough to sell at this point, right? But it is what it is. There's a fair number of transactions that are falling out because people are, and I think they get nervous somewhere along the line that somehow they've been convinced it's not a good time to buy or it's not a good time to sell. So we're seeing a fair number of deals that are falling through at the last minute. Interest rates are what they are. As we've seen, they've ticked up a lot in the last several months. Yeah, I was just looking yesterday, and 30-year rates are up around 8%, so more, even a little bit over that right now. And as you've probably remember from the last Fed announcement, which was a few weeks ago, they're projecting decreases in those interest rates to come later than we had hoped or that we had thought might happen. So we're going to be living with those higher rates for probably at least another year, if not longer. Now, this is the chart that I always like to lean in on, and things I think when we get nervous and we look at short-term issues, is to remind ourselves, this chart goes back to 1960. And that is a very positive return on investment over those years, right? So yes, we've seen a little bit of a drop off in pricing in some markets in the last, 6 months to 12 months. But the truth is, we can always feel confident that if we're working to help people get into homes, not only are we creating homes, which would create a lifetime of memories, but we are truly creating the opportunity for generational wealth. So this is something I always like to come back to. It's like, and it's not hard to understand. It's like, you ever get nervous talking to a consumer, show him this. It's like, that's a good number, right? Okay, so let's also talk about foreclosures. Again, one of the things that drives me crazy about the media, and I'm sure you guys too, is, so if you look at media lately in the last couple of weeks about foreclosures, what are they going to tell you? Oh, foreclosures are up 28%, they're up 33%. There's all this doom and gloom, right? And so what they're showing is that little tiny tick up from one to the other, but they're not showing you this longer term perspective, right? So this chart goes back to 2005, and you can see, obviously, we had a huge boom in foreclosures, right? But they're acting like, oh my gosh, they're projecting it like we're back to 2008, 9, 10 levels, which we are not nowhere near close to, right? So again, another thing to try to counterpoint some of the media that's out there is about, yes, it has gone up slightly, but the truth is it's nowhere near where it's been for almost 20 years. Now these are numbers that just came out in September, and they're showing how the home purchase sentiment index, this is back down to 2011, that the purchasers are definitely falling off, right? Which again, we don't have the inventory for them anyway, but we're seeing that that's off significantly. And this is this chart is showing the blue is good time to buy, the red is bad time to buy, and the net good time to buy, you can see it's gone off significantly in the last, 3 to 4 years, again, as you would expect, given what's going on in the marketplace. So with all of this said, it's like our job is to try to help people understand that it still really is an opportunity to get into real estate. And, what role can all of us play in helping people understand that it really is a very good investment over the long haul. So NAR, some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I don't think are going to be news to you. It's more about what do we do about them that is where I think we all need to focus our energies, right? So clearly NAR has, I'm calling it a cultural crisis, for lack of a better name, right? So hostile work environment, sexual harassment, et cetera, as we're all aware, letters of, calls for resignation, et cetera. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm sure some of you may be involved with trying to fix some of that, which is awesome. And thank you for doing that work. But the truth is, this stuff isn't just isolated to NAR. Any one of us in any kind of a company has a risk for potentially creating issues that can cause us trouble and can be uncomfortable for our employees and things like that, right? And so this was some data that just came out over the weekend. I don't know if you guys may have seen it too. This came from 1000 Watt. And this was to practitioners, right? And so the red is the answer that was the most prevalent, if you want to just look at it quickly. So which of the following statement about NAR's handling of its recent sexual harassment do you agree with most? Number one by far was, I disagree strongly with how this was and is being handled and would like to see more senior leaders being replaced. So that sentiment is not going anywhere. This is literally a day and a half or 2 days old, so it's brand new. And then generally speaking, how do you view this issue at NAR? The issue reflects deep institutional problems that can only be solved by sweeping changes to NAR. That was, again, the number one trait. Now, again, we can all say poor NAR, but the truth is many of our organizations are structured kind of according to the way that NAR is structured, right? We're smaller versions of them, but we have a lot of the same kinds of issues. And, so what can we do to prevent this from happening, to examine whether it ever has happened or whether we have any of our own issues, right? To make sure that we don't have a continued pattern around this. So I have a few suggestions about you, but before I get there, one of the things that was noted with Redfin, obviously they're pulling out of or recommending, the pulling out is a bit of a headline, right? The truth is, they're saying to require people to cancel their memberships. No one can require you to cancel a membership, right? That's an overstatement. But they can say that you don't have to join, which is the opposite side, right? And they cited NAR's lack of responsiveness to their own suggestions about policy and for all of these cultural issues as the reasons why they were suggesting and or requiring, depending on your perspective, that they were going to go. So what do we do about all that? So there's one thing, and this probably won't be super popular with all of you, but I tend to say what I think regardless. One of the things I think we all need to think about is and many of us have volunteered on many kinds of not-for-profit boards, I'm sure many of you have been very active, right? And when you think about your role, whether you were a board member or if you ultimately became president of an organization, you were, of course, welcomed and rewarded, and people were happy to see you and might buy you a nice lunch and things like that, right? But you never get that level of sort of like, I don't know, praise or elevation, I guess is the word that comes to mind, that we get when we do these installation dinners and there's people in long gowns. And, we raise this level of volunteerism to a place where it's crazy. Some people call it the realtor prom. I know some people hate those words, but that's the truth. Some people call them coronations, and when we think about that, we're inviting this level of sort of ego and elevation above others that just isn't true or fair, right? All realtors are created equal. All staff are created equal with those that they serve as volunteers, right? So I think some things to think about in terms of how do we, of course, encourage participation, but not elevate it to a level where it may just put people in an unequal kind of a situation, right? So, and here's some other very tangible, practical things I think I'll think about that aren't going to cost us a ton of money. So, there are 7 states in California is one of them. There's 7 states in America that require everyone who is an employee or an employer to take sexual harassment prevention training. I don't know if any of you are in one of those states, but many are not, right? Most of us are not. So wouldn't it make sense? And these classes are usually 1 hour, right? It's not a huge amount of time. And they're anywhere from free to $29. So we're not talking, a huge investment, right? But require volunteers that are going to be interfacing with the staff to take sexual harassment prevention training. And ideally require the staff to do it as well, right? It's a proactive step. And I have to take them because I'm in California. They're not big onerous things. I mean, do I want to do it? No. Is it one of those things I get up in the morning thinking about? Absolutely not. But it is really helpful to remind you of behaviors, and some of the classes do a good job of those things that might be a little on the edge, right? Of like, well, was that really harassment? Did I really create a hostile work environment? Is that really something I should be concerned about, right? But thinking about that stuff is really, really important. And, training people even on what appropriate behavior looks like. And here's something, again, I think that would be relatively simple for us to do, but could make a difference. So I'm sure many of you now, before you start meetings, read an antitrust statement or share it with people or tell people to refer to it, right? We have a lot of sensitivity about being careful not to mention companies or talk about pricing and all the things. Of course, you guys know what antitrust does, right? But what we don't do is we don't remind ourselves as often about other types of appropriate behavior, right? How do we make sure that when we're in a board room, we're being respectful of one another, we're respectful of differing opinions, we're not trying to dominate the conversation, we're not, God forbid, saying something that would be considered inappropriate, right? That is terrible. Or creating an environment where someone in the room feels so uncomfortable that they believe it's a hostile environment. So it wouldn't be a big lift for us to take that antitrust statement, add a few sentences below it to remind ourselves about what appropriate behaviors looks like. And again, it's a proactive step. Is it going to fix everything? No, but it reminds us, just like the antitrust statements do, right? And here's another thing I'm hearing a lot of lately is there have been inappropriate situations, whether it be board member to board member, board member to staff member, staff to staff, there's a variety of different places, but particularly when the volunteer leadership is involved. And if there's a situation where I was just talking to a group recently where they felt like one of their board members was exhibiting antitrust behavior on a regular basis, so much so that the attorney in the room told them to stop, and they didn't, which was another problem. But regardless, if you look at most of our organizational bylaws, they don't very clearly quantify what inappropriate behavior is and or what we do about it if somebody exhibits it on some regular basis, right? There's no black and white ruling in terms of if you do this and if you do it for 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, whatever the demonstration might be, and you figure out who is determining that you're doing that inappropriate behavior. There's no clear-cut way to say, okay, you hit that, you did it 3 times, we told you not to do it, you were talked to, you didn't do it, you have to go, right? We don't have those controls in place. And it's a really kind of a scary thing. And it's even more scary when you think about it from a CEO, paid CEO staff position. So what if something happens with somebody on the board, or worse yet, the board president or board chair? Who do they go to and what is their recourse, right? So we have some situations where people may feel like they have struggled with something or they're struggling with something and there's no way to round it. There's nothing to do about it. There's no one to talk to about it. So it's some things we really need to think about, right? And super importantly, if there's anything we've learned from what's going on with NAR is if an employee has an issue and they report it, and it of course has to be documented appropriately, and I'm sure many of you know how to do that, right? That we are very, very careful that there's no sign of retaliation against these situations. If you saw the claim that came out from San Diego, for example, the folks in that lawsuit, and again, it's alleged, right? So nobody's saying it's true, but just for what it's worth, it's an example that's specific and real. Some of the people that were staff members said they reported issues that they saw inequities by the way the financials were being reported. They told the board of directors, and instead of the board of directors responding, they fired them. That would clearly be considered retaliation, right? So thinking about ways that we're all uber, super sensitive about these things, and that we're doing whatever we can. And so these are just suggestions. I would love if anybody has any other things that they've done, if they want to share it in the chat, that's great too. But we can't ignore it, and we can't just say, oh, it's that company over there and it's not us, because it could be any one of us at any moment, right? Whether it's me with a consulting firm, or you guys with a brokerage, or anybody with an organized real estate. So something to think about. Okay, I haven't talked about this topic in a while, so I thought I would just kind of circle back on real estate portals and what's happening there. We haven't really, it hasn't been an issue, but there's a little bit of news that I wanted to share with you. So first, you may have seen this, but Homes.com, which many of you probably know is owned by CoStar, hit the 100 million visitor mark, or I think it was this past month. So that's big news for them. But more importantly, what I think we should be paying attention to is that Homes.com has always been a strong leader in that space. It was usually not the number one. It was usually number 2, 3, 4, but it was a strong leader. But with CoStar behind it, which is almost a $34 billion company, they are spending a lot more time and energy on it. They're going to be and are increasing the traffic and listing exposure and leads that are generated through that site. So good news is, if you have partnerships in place, you may be doing a better job of helping, your agents get listing exposure and leads. But you have to, pay close attention to, is your membership comfortable with what they're doing, how they're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a group of people that have claimed, and if many of you may have seen Andy Florence speak, he's talked about how he really wants to be the number one in the residential portal space, just like he is in the rental space, and he does a great job in the commercial space as well. So someone that's definitely on the move, and someone to to keep a close eye on. Now, Broker Public Portal, which we haven't talked about in quite some time, because frankly, they've been kind of underground, is starting to, there's rustlings there. So I wanted to give you guys kind of an inside look at what's happening there. And for those that are not familiar, let me just take us back a little bit, and then we can move forward on it. So Broker Public Portal is a group that was started back in 2014, and it was formed by brokerages and MLSs representing, a whole chunk of, hundreds of thousands of agents. And the whole point there was just to create a better and more accurate alternative to the large listing, or not even an alternative, kind of an addition to large listing portals. At the time, if you remember back, that's almost 10 years ago, which I can't believe it's been that long already. There was a lot of issues where agents and brokers were concerned that, there may be other people sitting on their listing, and they would have to, wouldn't get the exposure on their own listing. So Broker Public Portal crafted the fair display guidelines, which many of you may be familiar with. If not, the simple answer is if it's your listing, you get the lead, right? And so it can't be if I'm an advertiser and it's your listing, I get the lead, right? That was the biggest kind of underpinning principle, which is still in place today. So some of you may be using HomeSnap, which is now recently becoming Homes Pro, for those that are not aware of that. And that's a brand new platform from when I hear. It's not actually the HomeSnap platform anymore. But Broker Public Portal, which again wasn't a technology company, it was a leadership group, right? That said, let's partner with someone that knows how to do this. And they loved HomeSnap because it was very well maximized in the mobile space, which of course is really important for this. They had a great way to connect agents and consumers easily to each other, and they delivered millions of free leads and national listing exposure. So it really was a successful venture. It was worked out for a lot of people, and a lot of people really love and loved HomeSnap as a product. So in 2020, CoStar, who now also owns Homes, purchased HomeSnap. At the time, there was a joint venture in place between the Broker Public Portal brokers and MLSs and HomeSnap, and that was disbanded. And part of the agreement was that once that group, sort of got divorced from one another, that there was capital that had to be paid from CoStar to Broker Public Portal. And so that money is now available to create Broker Public Portal Part 2. So that's what's happening now. So again, there's still a broker and MLS led group together behind this, and they've kind of doubled down on what's the purpose of this group. So they're really trying to support broker profitability. So, providing meaningful ways to agents to nurture clients and prospects, again, similar to what HomeSnap did first time around, maintaining that your listing, your lead, And now many of the portals, at the time when broker portal started, it was a lot of advertising type of relationships. Now many of the largest portals actually take a referral fee, so they take anywhere from 25 to 40% of a commission from an agent. And so again, there's a agreement that definitely no referral fees, but again, maintaining, if it's your listing, then you know the activity comes to you. They're dialing up the ability for brokers to kind of wrap their arms around this and make it their own, so to be branded from them. They're even talking about adding the ability for brokers who have ancillary services like mortgage and title and things like that, to actually be able to show those kinds of programs, not across, but only on their own listings, right? So if Marilyn Wilson Realty has a mortgage service and I have a listing, it might be able to be, you know, to be shown there. And importantly, not unlike some of the other initiatives in the market today, there's a big push for the data that gets added to this system and the data that might get pushed, whether it be lead activity and things like that, that's all well maintained and controlled in a way that brokers are comfortable with it, that it's not being used to be sold for some other purpose that they didn't agree to. So very much driven by the need for this to be led and directed in a way that brokers are comfortable. So, you know, what will it look like, you know, to have national coverage? It may be integrated with strong existing MLS consumer sites and or MLS client portals. So if you work with, you know, Paragon or Flex or any of them, they each have their sort of client portal. It's, you know, because it's brand new, it can use the latest and greatest, including AI, which is exciting. And it can be built really with the specifics, because it's, you know, kind of think of it as, you know, a green field, a brand new slate, right? Using what are consumers really looking for today, and it can be built with today's standards, which is really exciting. So, you know, a lot more to come on this, but it's great. So right now, the company, their CEO search, we're actually doing it. It should be done probably in the next month or so. And they've been active, the committees have been active at work, soliciting proposals from technology solutions, public records, based data records, and things like that, to kind of put a whole bunch of things together. So when the CEO hits the ground running, they can start moving quickly. So more to come on that, but I did want to give you an update that it's kind of coming around again. The other one, I don't know if I mentioned, which I should, I thought it was in here, but the other one that's doing some great work is nestfully.com. And that's being managed by California Regional, the largest MLS in the country, and Bright MLS, with the second largest in the country. They're kind of on opposing coasts. And they're putting together another portal with following many of the same principles that I just described. And they're inviting MLSs around the country to join them as well. So we may end up with two of these types of things that are sort of industry-led and industry-centered, which will be, you know, again, great for agents and brokers. Okay, so now I'm going to flip over to the topic that, frankly, I think we've all been talking about a lot and maybe even too much, but just wanted to be sure that everybody's up to speed, because this is lots of existential threats that are coming our way that we have to be up to speed on. So there's many lawsuits. I'm sure many of you know, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the one that's, you know, that started actually yesterday, just talked to NAR today. They're starting their actually activity today, is the Burnett case. And that the whole center of that is around that consumers that are the plaintiffs said we had no understanding or believed we had no power to negotiate at all with our buy-side commission. We felt like we were paying just as much. If the home price went down and I made less, I'd still have to pay that full commission, right? So there's a lot of belief that through this, that plaintiffs believe that we're not being fully transparent with them, and that they don't have the control that they need. And in Missouri, it violated actually several different antitrust situations. So that's why it's, you know, what's happening with that. So this is absolute worst case. So I don't want to scare you, but I also want you to understand if the letter of the law settlement came through the way that it's being proposed today, this is what could happen. So using information from Missouri, if I had a brokerage, I had 100 agents, each of them did an average of 10 deals a year. So that would be 1,000 transactions. And let's say there's arguments whether it's 22 or 23, but let's say it's 8 years of that, of how far back we'd have to go. So that'd be about 8,000 transactions. The average buy-side commission in Missouri is $4,000. So if I had to pay back, and whoever I is, whether it be, as you know, we'll talk about in a second, some of the brokerages involved have settled. But if a brokerage had to pay it, or if an MLS had to pay it on behalf of them, or if NAR had to pay it on, all of that's still up in the air. It could be as much as $32 million for that one brokerage. Needless to say, I don't think most brokerages with 100 agents have $32 million sitting around, right? Now, again, this is worst case. What we've seen so far, and we can talk about the settlements, is not nearly that bad, but that's why brokers get really nervous about this when they see those kinds of numbers, right? So the no select case, which is in Massachusetts, it was settled with MLS PIN. That's a broker-owned MLS. And they settled the suit, broker-owned meaning that they don't have any connection to NAR, right? So there's no realtor connection. It's a wholly owned MLS owned by brokers. That suit was settled for $3 million. And they agreed to make the offering of compensation optional, which, as you now know, many of you probably know, NAR just said you can put zero in, which in effect is making commission optional. And they had to add some other new language to their rules. And the brokers that were associated with franchises that were in other lawsuits, like the Sitzer Burnett case I just mentioned, they could still get sued. So it didn't like buy them out of everything. But as you may have heard just recently, and frankly, this is the thing I'm the most worried about right now, that the US DOJ said they've stopped the proposed settlement between MLS PIN and what the courts had agreed to, suggesting that the commission rules that were part of the settlement did not go far enough. So we don't know what this means yet, right? We don't know what that means. What I'm worried about are things like the DOJ, if you remember some of the things that we tried to settle with them before, and language we're hearing in DC a lot is separation, right? So is that separation of the MLS from the association? So I don't have to purchase the association to get the MLS. What exactly does it mean? Exactly are they going? We really don't know, but we know that it's probably more aggressive than the last settlement, or they would have settled with the last settlement, right? So we just don't know. This is the kind of thing in your groups, you need to talk about what the what ifs might be about this and what you would do depending on what the what if that actually, came out looks like. Yes, Jeff Bosch says, yes, the settlement is not approved. The settlement was approved by the courts, and then the DOJ came in and said, not settled. Yeah, so it's it was settled, but now it's not settled. So yeah, you're right, Jeff. It's not actually done. It's still on the way. And then the Anywhere group, which obviously we're all aware of them, they settled for $83 million. One of the things I've heard from a couple of attorneys, which is interesting to do the math on, if you were trying to figure out where that number came from, is it looks like for both Anywhere and RE/MAX, the number they settled on was about half of the amount of cash on hand in the company. So that would mean, Anywhere had about $166 million in cash. They basically settled to give half of their cash position to settle these and get out from under it. RE/MAX was $55 million. And, their settlement that we've now seen, and there's more detail to it, but the most important one, I think, for all of us is that they cannot require association membership. From what I've heard, the independent contractor agreement that RE/MAX had actually required you to join an association, and they're going to have to remove that. But the good news is it releases all RE/MAX companies, franchises across the country from any further claims, or at least that's what they're claiming. Again, with attorneys, one never knows, right? But that's the hope. So as you're starting to see, there's this whole thing about a broker standing up and saying you do not have to be part of an association any longer. And what does that mean? What could that mean? How many people would drop off? You don't know. In California, for example, where association membership is not required because of a lawsuit that was tried many years ago, about 40% of licensees are not realtors. I just heard today that in Florida, it's more like 50% are not realtors. And both of those markets have been, as they have had the ability to not have to join an association for some time. So it's pretty significant, right? And I don't know if any of you saw the survey I referenced earlier that 1000 Watch has put out, and we've had surveys like this in the past ourselves that are very consistent. They asked agents across the country, if you did not have to belong to NAR, how many of you would not belong? And 39.1% said they would not belong. So these are significant changes, right? looking at your financials. What if, again, if you're an association on this call or on a board, think about that. If you lost 39% of your membership, what are the implications for that, from your cash reserves, for the staffing levels you could support, the services you could provide, the programs you could provide? And the flip side of it is, what would you do to stop it going to as high as 40% of people, right? What would you do differently? So these are the kinds of things I think we need to think about, right? So these states don't require, there are several that do not require it today. They still exist. The associations still exist. The MLSs still exist. Yet again, there's some significant percentage of licensees that are not part of the association. Some are not part of the MLS either, but many of them are not part of the association, right? And so what in those markets, people have asked us, well, what happens if I've got people that are not realtors? How do they follow the code of ethics? So what a lot of them do is they bake in the code of ethics concepts. They don't necessarily call it that. Some actually do. Some say, if you are going to become part of our MLS or our MLS, you have to follow the NAR's code of ethics. But others just kind of paraphrase the same thing. And they bake those into the user agreement. So before you begin working with an MLS, you have to sign that and agree that you will participate. Some of them agree that they would arbitrate through the association. Some use third parties, but it works and the business goes on, but it is different, right? And as an association, I mean, to me, this is the scariest thing right now. MLSs have proven in many markets they can survive without this. But if you're an MLS or an association that, just counts on the fact people come because they have to come, and you haven't really thought seriously lately about how do you sell your value proposition? How do you sell what you do and how meaningful it is to people? You really have to start thinking about that, right? And how do you differentiate what you do relative to other associations? And importantly, how do you make sure that you have, I think our biggest fear and our biggest worry is ambivalence, right? All of us have, and all associations and MLSs have people that love what the organization does, and they're probably not at risk of going anywhere. Others have, and usually it's a small number, but we have people that really don't like what we do, and they're probably going, right? They'd probably be the first group to go. But it's those people in the middle, right? And that's most members usually, and most subscribers. What do you do to help them understand? How do you make sure that, because a lot of these changes of, well, I'm not going to require my agents to do this anymore, is coming from the broker level, right? What do you do to make sure that the brokers in your market, especially the ones that bring you a lot of your membership, right? The larger brokers in the market, understand what you do, have a direct connection with you, have a trust relationship with you, feel like they have the ability to come to you and get the service they need, for you to champion a cause for them if they have something that they need changed, and clearly understand what you do. And again, maybe you deepen or expand certain types of services once you talk to them and find out the kinds of things that they think are appropriate coming from an association that they wouldn't normally do themselves, right? So it's time to start thinking like competitors, not with each other. I mean, you can, but it's not really more about that. It's more about competing for the hearts and minds of people that may or may not understand. In that same survey that 1000 Watt did, they asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you value your NAR membership? How much do you think it really helps you? And I don't remember the exact numbers, but the prevalent number was in the 1 to 3, right? The lowest numbers out of 10 range. So there are people that are mad. They don't feel like they're getting the value. And frankly, there's always been agents that don't understand the value they get from associations. That's nothing new. But blended with anger and disappointment with some of the other things that's going on, is where it really starts to get scary, right? And again, how many brokers are going to jump on the bandwagon? We don't know, right? Redfin came out, Remax has to come out, Anywhere. How many brands and how many members are associated with all the Anywhere brands? That's a significant number, right? So this is not going anywhere, and we're going to really have to think about what we're going to do differently to survive through it. And, and here's another question, right? So I just asked this again yesterday of one of our most noted attorneys in our space. It said, what's your sense? Again, nobody knows, right? It's a trial. No one knows. But I said, what's your gut? If you were going to bet on this, who do you think is going to win? I haven't heard one person say that they believe we're going to prevail as the industry. So if that's the case, and again, what kind of damages would we have? And even if there is settlements, what would those look like? We don't know, right? What if it pushes NAR over the edge? What if they have to restructure? What if they have to significantly dial back what they offer, to their core services of maybe advocacy and maybe professional standards, right? Or what if a lot of the other things go away? Or worse yet, what if it really, really goes bad? And what if local and state associations and MLSs had to completely go it alone? What would it look like, right? So you guys know me. I am not a doom and gloomer. I'm not the person that's like, oh my God, the sky's falling. Let's all, put our head in the sand and die. I'm not that person. But on the other hand, we have some things here that are really important that we don't just say, oh, it's going to be fine. Oh, we're going to win. Okay, we might. And if we do, terrific. And I certainly hope, and I know all of you hope that we do. But if we don't, what are we going to do? And I can tell you, we've done this a lot in strategic plans, and it's really helpful. So even if, let's say all of this goes completely in our favor and everything's great, if you have done the work to say, dial back and think really hard about what is it that really makes us special? What is it that is really meaningful? What is it that we think we should be doing we're not doing? And you really ask fundamental questions about your organization. Usually what happens is, with smart people in the room, which many of you are, right? All of you are, I should say, not many of you, all of you. You get in a room, you start thinking about scenarios of things you would do if we really were up against it. And you know what happens? You find things you're like, that's a great idea. We should do that right now, right? You find things that just by not pushing ourselves as much as we should, we don't necessarily think about them. But when we really think about, wow, we're right on the edge and this thing could be all gone tomorrow, we get really creative and we come up with great ideas. So I would highly recommend that, again, not that we're trying to be doom and gloomers, but that you think about worst case and you chase the best case, because you probably will come out of it stronger and you'll come out with some great ideas that you normally would not have thought about. So something to think about. And just, this is another component of all these lawsuits and stuff. It's something that I think is helpful for you to see, because when we saw these lawsuits coming out as WAV Group, we're like, do really consumers really not know those things? And let's ask them ourselves, right? Because of course, a few plaintiffs might have been convinced, but how does the industry feel overall? And so we asked consumers across the country, and 74% said, yes, it is important to be told the percentage that they're paying when they're buying a home. But this was important. Only 58% believed that they could negotiate that commission. Now, it's not like it's 5%. The lawsuits would make you think nobody believes they can do it. But on the other hand, it's not 100%, right? So are we really doing our job to help people understand how it works, what flexibility they have, and importantly, at the same time, selling our value, right? We don't want them to just go, no, I'm going to pay you less money than I normally would. But on the other hand, are we really selling our value proposition? And are we doing that confidently? That's a big question. KB says, I agree, Marilyn, necessity is the mother of invention. You are absolutely right. That's where we, sometimes you get pushed against the wall, you come up with something. And one of the things that I really honestly believe about our industry, which I love, is that, and I don't know if this is the right word, but it's the one that comes to mind, we're scrappers, right? We are people that we can put a nickel and dime together and make something happen that other industries might have just said, oh, it's too hard and stop, right? Commission-only salespeople are tough. And we support people that support commission-only salespeople are tough. So it's important to think about that. But again, we asked them, do you know who paid the commission? It's all over the place, right? They're not exactly clear. More than not think it's the seller, but not everybody knows that. So now, and do you feel like the commissions in general were clear? Only 47% believe that they are. So we've got a lot of work to do. Again, I don't think it's as bad as what the commission lawsuits would suggest, but I don't think we're perfect either. And we have room for improvement for sure. Now, this was the good news. 88% said they believe that the agent did earn the commission that they worked on. So it's not like our agents aren't doing a great job, or if you are an agent that you're not doing a great job, but we're not necessarily providing as much transparency about how we work and what we do as we really could. So what can we do about that, right? There's a few things. And again, I think probably a lot of you have heard about this somewhere, but I just want to make sure everybody's 100%, because I know there's still people not 100% up to speed. So if you're in a state, and there are very few that does not require a buyer's agency agreement to be put in place, there are many organizations now, state associations, MLSs, and a variety of other people, like Northwest MLS, for example, worked with their state, their state association to get a rule passed. And in their case, it was very much a bipartisan pass, because who doesn't want to protect a consumer's right? I mean, right, it makes sense. It probably wouldn't be that difficult to get it done. Or people are pushing for NAR to create some sort of a national policy about that as well. And I can tell you the brokers that I've spoken with, and if you're brokers, you may agree with me or not, I don't know, but brokers really like the idea that it would be coming from the state, which takes the pressure off of the broker having to reinforce it on their own individual brokerage, because, or in your individual MLS or association, because people feel like if I'm requiring it and you're next door and you're not requiring it, whether you be a broker or an association, people might just flip over and move around, right? So it really has to be kind of a united front, whether it be a national policy, even a statewide policy would help, right? So that's something that a lot of people are looking at. And there are people like Brian Schneider, for example, if you guys know him, he's a great attorney. He works with many of the MLSs around the country. He has worked and has created documents of things that he's happy to share with people to say, if you need a place to start, or if you just want another set of input, he's happy to share that. So if anybody wants any of that information, just drop me a note at Marilyn at WAV Group and I'll connect you with him so he can give you the types of information he's been working on. Obviously, requiring buyer's agency agreements is important. And I can tell you, even in the states where they do require buyer's agency agreements, what people are doing is they don't get them signed up front, which is the spirit of the point, right? Is you and I are now partners in this. You agree that I'm going to help you find a home, and you're going to agree to compensate me when we first start working together. A lot of agents don't do that, even in states where it requires it. They'll say, okay, as part of the 14 pieces of paper you sign when an offer is done, they just kind of slip it in and sign it then. And it's really not the spirit of what's going on. And there's some people that are talking too about, should we even think about, should the MLS play a role in creating some sort of a buyer's registry, right? So that, and is that the role of the MLS or the association? And there's lots of arguments one way or the other, but again, some things to talk about where we might record that, yes, that person has signed a buyer's agency agreement with that particular agent, and it would be a searchable database, so that if a agent runs into someone, they could find out if they in fact have signed an agreement with someone else or not. So that's something to think about too. And then, this is really important. Again, I think this whole topic is associations need to help, MLSs need to help, brokers need to help. We all kind of have to work together on this, right? But there are tools and things that we can use to help buyers agents be confident in what they do, take credit for what they do, and quantify what they do. So there's things like the 179 ways, that NAR document that some of you may have seen. And then there's a couple of other things too that I think could be added to that. So one of the things we tend to do is we kind of don't want to talk about what can go wrong in a transaction, because we want to make not people nervous, right? But sometimes you're better off to be really honest and say, here's the kinds of things that I've seen gone sideways. And guess what? Because I'm with you, I'm gonna do everything in my power, because I've seen it, done it, been there, and I've got the experience to help us not, get in any of those kinds of issues. And the third thing I think we can talk about is, if you think about all the ways that buyers agencies or agents are supported by MLSs, right? Whether it be transaction management tools, whether it be, client collaboration portals, mobile websites, consumer-facing websites that MLSs offer. I mean, if you could go through your mix of tools that you offer and think about how much and in what ways do they help agents support clients, there's also a great story to be told there, right? So the MLS can become part of a larger buyers agency story of, not only do I have the expertise, do I have the training, do I have the continuing ed credit, do I have a great brokerage behind me who's going to protect your best interest and mine, I also have an MLS that's providing us with all kinds of things, not the least of which is a ton of data to look at to try to even find a home, right? So there's ways, I think, for all of us to contribute at some level in dialing up the stature of buyer's agency. And, this is one that I just mentioned briefly, but if you look at companies like Bright MLS and Northern Nevada Regional MLS, they've actually, done studies where they show how the value of homes that are exposed in MLSs are actually much higher than those that aren't. And just promoting the fact that the greatest number of listings, the most accurate, up-to-date, comprehensive listings are coming because you are a member of an MLS. So if you as a consumer are working with someone that belongs to an MLS and or an association, they're getting you absolutely as much opportunity for you to be able to purchase as you want. So lots of things to think about there, right? Okay, so here's another one. I'm just full of joy today, aren't I? Everything I'm talking about is stuff that's like, but disaster preparedness. Okay, look, there's a whole lot going on here too. I'm sure many of you are aware that one of the big MLS vendors had a significant issue. It had a cyber attack. It took down markets for some for hours, some for days, some for weeks. Some are really not completely even now up to speed 100%. But it reminds us of a lot of things that can go wrong, right? And so if you're in a situation where you're hit a disaster, whether that be a hurricane that's taken out your office, whether that be a fire that's taken out your neighborhood, a cyber attack, a fair housing violation. I mean, it goes on and on of the number of things, right? Look, I mean, these are all just some examples of things that can go wrong. Security, some of this harassment type stuff we just talked about, ADA compliance lawsuits, another health crisis, some sort of a staffing crisis. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong, right? So what are we doing, again, to think about the worst case, to prepare for the best case? And natural disasters is another one. I mean, the climate change is real. I think we're all got to agree now it's real, and things are happening in weird places. There's hurricanes in California and there's earthquakes in New York and just all kinds of crazy stuff, right? So what are you doing to think about these worst cases? It's the kind of stuff we all were like, we don't want to think about that, right? But truth is, if you're going to really be a steward of a healthy company, whether any type of company in real estate, you've got to think first and foremost about prevention, right? What are we going to do? How do we put ourselves in positions where if any of these things happen, we're just going to avoid them completely? And some of that is not just your organization, it's organizations that you depend on, right? In the case of an MLS, they require an MLS vendor to support them with product and services. What questions are you asking? Have you had your own security audit to see if there's anything going on? One MLS told me about something. And again, if you have a question, I'm happy to send this link to you because I just used it in my own company. There's tests out there, third-party tests, where you can send what looks like a normal email, but that it's actually attached to a phishing thing. It's not a real one. It's not going to cause damage, right? But what it does is it tests all of us on how sensitized are we? Are we paying enough attention when we click through on things? And if there's a particular, persons that seems to have issues with this, how do you train them, right? So there's a lot of things we can do. But then preparedness is really important, right? So again, think about all those things that could potentially go wrong. And what's your backup plan if they do, right? First, you got to just document all the things that potentially could go wrong, which is a lot, right? With all those different categories I described. And then think about, all right, if this happens, what would we do? Some of it might be things you don't yet have within your arsenal, right? Like some MLSs, for example, had two MLS systems. So if one went down, they could bounce to another, but most don't, as an example, right? I'm not saying you all do that, but just as an example. So thinking about if our email system went down, if our phone systems went down, if our technology went down, if our office got broken into. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong, right? And thinking about what each of those scenarios looks like and preparing a response, some of which might require work to be done right now. Some of it might be, if it happens, here's what we do, right? But it's got to be in writing. It's got to be trained on. There's got to be more than one person that has opportunities for that. So when you got into the responsive area and you started to think about recovery, and by the way, when you're looking at new technology partners or other types of partners, are you looking at the sort of downside protections to yourself? So if something does go wrong, what is their preparedness plan? So you're asking all those questions, right? And then importantly, what are we telling? How often are we telling it? Who's it coming from? How is it getting distributed? Et cetera, et cetera. For example, we work with, we're the management company for Greater Southern MLS in Louisiana. And one of our association partners had 2 hurricanes within 3 weeks. They had not even started to dig out of the first one and they got hit again. So they had provided us with their database because we were communicating to them as their MLS, right, to all their members. We were able to provide information they wanted to provide, but they just couldn't because they were literally underwater, right? So thinking about backup plans, how could Could MLSs help each other? Could associations help each other? Do we need third parties? Like a whole bunch of things that you need to think about, right? But thinking about it now and not when you're in the middle of it is really, really important. Ask anybody, and if some of you may have been going through some of these things, you understand what I'm talking about. There's also potential financial implications for this stuff. Like, do you have money set aside? Do you have cyber attack insurance? There's a lot of things you can look at. So a whole spectrum of things, but definitely if you haven't thought about that stuff, make sure that you're paying attention. Okay, agent safety. This is another one that we just did another survey on recently to find out kind of where are we on this. And there's a full report that'll be coming out shortly, but I wanted to just give you some of the highlights. So we asked people, have you been a victim of a crime? And we'll explain what we mean by crime in a minute, right? But if you look at this, 45% of women said they've had been some victim of some sort of a crime, and 25% of men have said it, overall 37. So I think our perception is it's a very small percentage, and it is, thank God, for any like serious crimes, right? But there are others. So, and going back to this idea that harassment is only in one place, it's not. So we asked them, have you been a victim of any of these types of crimes? And the number one for those that said yes, that was harassment, stalking, another crime not listed here, right? So a crime doesn't have to just be some of the horrible things of robberies or assault or sexual assault, right? There's a lot of different ways where people can be victims of things. And again, are we thinking about it in that inclusive a context and see what we can do to try to support people, right? So how frequently are you by yourself when you work with homes? So 40% of women say that, which is still a lot. But the other thing that I'm really concerned about when I look at these numbers is I think we tend to think more about safety as a woman's issue, but look at this. 59% of men are by themselves, much more so than women. And I understand that, right? Men, people feel like they're stronger, they can defend themselves. But the truth is, if somebody's got a gun to your head, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you're going to be at risk, right? So some of the education, maybe we've got to think in a more balanced way about that all of us are at risk at some level if we're not really paying attention to these things. How often will you ask someone to accompany you? Women, it's only about a quarter, or I'm sorry, it's about 18% of the time. Men, it's never. 68% never do that, right? Just a small little 3% do. So again, I'm not trying to make, scare men into submission or anything like that, but it's just a sensitivity. Say, we all have to be careful because sometimes we're all in situations that we can't defend ourselves. And then how frequently do you verify a new client? A very little amount, 16% for women and 11% for men. Many of you are probably aware there's tools like Forewarn that I know it's available in a lot of places, and yet we're not seeing in the aggregate, people aren't doing something that is actually relatively simple to do to verify that you're actually, meeting with someone, getting their license, getting some form of identification that people know who you're working with. So while I think we've made great progress as an industry on this, I think we still have a long way to go, and education about, what can happen, how it happens, having, connections with people that do self-defense classes. I mean, there's a variety of things. You guys can be creative about how to solve it, right? But don't think because we've gotten more active that we've gotten there yet. We still have a long way to go to really keep people safe. And at the end of the day, that's absolutely the most important thing, right? We all have to do. Okay, what do we got now? We got about 6 minutes left. Let me talk a little bit about the NAR data sharing toolkit. So we're actually working with NAR on this, and wanted to reinforce a few things that I think might have been a little misconstrued for those who were at CMLS. Number one is NAR is not requiring or even strongly recommending that people do data shares, or that they do it in the way they think they should be done, right? But their purpose in the PAG that was put together was to say, if someone believes it makes sense, can we help provide tools with people to help them easier to get started and to think through kind of how it works, right? That was really the core purpose. And why data sharing? There's a variety of different reasons, but here's kind of the most important things that we've seen is, brokers might, not want to belong to 5 MLSs to get the data they need to help their agents succeed. Sometimes there's markets where, there's a lot of overlap between the two, and yet brokers feel and agents feel like they have to still belong to both. There's opportunities to expand the listing exposure and lead gen capabilities. Again, eliminating some of those duplicate fees, helping brokerages think about ways to more seamlessly expand their business if they so choose to. And then really importantly, and probably ultimately the most important thing, is the more data that we can provide to consumers, the more transparent we're being, the more inclusive we're being, and frankly, the safer we're going to be as it relates to people that are, thinking somehow we're exclusive in the way that we do business, which is not true, but some people still feel that way, right? So what are some of the things? I've been lucky enough to talk to many people that are doing data shares in for a variety of different reasons. And these were kind of some of the key takeaways I just wanted to share with you. And did want to let you know that the cool toolkit will be released right around NAR NXT time. So if you are thinking about that and are looking for resources, it's going to be there. It's all going to be free. It'll be right, publicly available on the NAR website. But one of the most important things I think to think about starting with is putting broker needs at the center of this. It shouldn't be thinking about how MLSs can make more money or how they can control things or how they can be dominant in our marketplace or anything like that. It should be about what are the business practices, where are the business opportunities, and how do we help enable those business opportunities, right? So if I'm in the Northeast and I have a lot of people that fly to Florida or Arizona or the Carolinas for the winter, can I help them? How can I do it, as an example, right? And importantly, and really in approaching this with an open mind, that you have to be fully willing to compromise, that no one data share, and KB is on the call, she can attest to this because she's been part of one for a long time. No one group can get everything they want, right? The best way is when it all works together. And focusing on the similarities, not the differences, right? Most MLSs operate in a pretty similar way. There may be, differences in terms of rules and regs or statuses or property types or things like that. But those are the things. Focus on the things you do together and then try to work your way through the ones where you're not together. And, not trying to boil the ocean, right? Trying to do too much at once is just, it can make the whole thing blow up. So take it in phases, take it, a small step. Sometimes there's data share programs like RPR, for example, that's literally one click and it's super simple, doesn't cost you anything, all the way up to much more fundamentally and much more well integrated things. And, take them as you need to. And empower a task force that's connected, but not too big, but a group that's willing to make decisions and to move forward, right? And of course, making sure that you're working with practitioners that'll help you understand. Absolutely do not move that. And here's why, because it's going to screw up something that we do, right? Being careful about that. And really just giving yourself the chance to win, even if it's small wins, right? So it doesn't have to be all done over a day. This toolkit's being positioned like it's about statewide data sharing. The truth is there's very few. In fact, there's a few statewide MLSs. I don't know of any true statewide data share that exists, but there's people around states trying to come up with regional elements that maybe eventually can share with one another, right? So you don't have to do it all at once. If there's just two markets that want to work together, just go with those two markets, right? You can get there over time. And just a quick overview again, I won't go through all the details on this. I think, you guys probably are aware of this, but you kind of can, it's like, how do you do this? You do it one step at a time, right? So start with, what are you trying to do? What are the key challenges? How do we think we can work together? How can we make it work so that it's balanced, right? So sometimes if there's a large market and a small market, the large market can't afford as much as the large market can. So, can you equitably figure out how to have payment? How do you have governance structures that help everyone feel as though they can truly contribute and things like that, right? So there's a whole spectrum of things. This is all going to be in the toolkit. This whole thing right here is going to be in the toolkit. But take it one step at a time and don't think you have to do it all at once, because you just can't. Again, if any of you that are on the call that have been through them know it can be 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, even 10 years before these things come together. But as long as you're trying to continue to address what brokers are looking for from you, you're moving in the right direction. And here's some of the things that I think are really great. And again, I can't be picking on you, KB, but she can talk about this. So there's unintended benefits, not consequences, but benefits to these things, right? So in the situation recently where the MLS system went down, there were a data share in place where some of the people in the data share were using that MLS and system and others were using others. So by having a backup plan, it wasn't ideal, right? An agent likes to use the system they use, but they were able to stay in business because the data was available in other places, right? Others have been able to do things like shared services, where it's like, wow, you're really good at compliance. Maybe I should just have you do it for me too, right? They end up outsourcing. There's one in Oregon we've worked with where they've outsourced a bunch of things to each other, which is great. when groups get together, they can share best practices. So again, some data shares have little work groups among, here's all the compliance people, here's all the technology people, here's all the training people, and they share ideas with one another about what are the best ways to support the needs of our subscribers. So all kinds of good things can come from this, right? And again, they're not all created equal, they're not all the same, but this is kind of the spirit in which the data sharing toolkit's put together, is to just give people a chance to learn about some new things and say, maybe there is an opportunity for us to, to do something together. So yeah, so that's what I've got for you today. Lots of stuff going on. Anybody have any comments, questions, concerns, anything else that's bubbling up in your market that, you'd like me to comment on or talk about? Okay, well, I don't see anything coming through. Again, if you need to talk to me about anything, if you have any comments or questions, something you want to ask me privately, you guys know where I am at Marilyn at WAV Group. And if you haven't yet signed up for our newsletter, happy to do that. It's free. We don't bug you. We just do it to give you another chance to kind of keep up with the stuff in between our quarterly sessions. Okay, Monica said, thank you. Great information. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Well, again, I'm here for you. I know it's a little scary out there, but if you just want to bounce something off, or you're like, am I thinking about this right? You just let me know, right? I'm happy to help, because we're all in this together. It's not an easy time, but we know we do the right things. We know that our real estate industry does really serve the best interest of consumers, and many of you in different contexts serve in that capacity. So if we can help in any way, you just let us know. Okay. All right, guys. Well, you have a great rest of your week. And again, if you need anything, I am here for you. Thank you so much.